initial. So that means that there is opportunity, but we are still struggling to have we understand how to make money, sending the satellite, renting the satellite, but what is the recurrent revenue model that you can activate for satellites? You want to say?
Well, so at least for human spaceflight, first of all, there are many sovereign nations that want to train astronauts, and that builds an anchor tendency. So while that's still an expensive enterprise, the cadence of launches is driving down the overall cost, and the standardization of lots of different components in the supply chain are driving down the expense associated with procuring and assembling and launching and operating spacecraft. SWISTA-12 is using innovation to drive down the costs of content in space. So it's still expensive to get things into space and operate them, but cadence is certainly making an improvement there. Standardization is certainly making an improvement there. And I think one of the more important attributes of that is setting up a security system in space, especially militaries providing the necessary protections for assets in space are driving down some of the expense for doing so. And this is how humanity has evolved as it's expanded across the globe, right? First, militaries go off, determine what resources are available, they instantiate a presence, investors come along, they put up investments, oftentimes early days very speculative investments, they get large returns on those investments, they set up settlements, they expand, they gain resource, they move on. We're in the early days of that. I akin it to 1993, sitting in your living room, you've got a modem, it's 1200 baud, it took forever to launch a website, but 15 years later, there's a $1 trillion enterprise with websites. 15 years after that, there's another $1 trillion of communications, application layers, et cetera. So we're early days in space, but the necessary infrastructure to enable that growth of the economy, that's what's happening now. It is speculative in many of the types of investments that are being made, but without those investments, the large returns from things like SpaceX and others wouldn't be there because there'd be no economy, because that safety wouldn't be assured, et cetera. So, 10 years from now, I think we'll be talking about the applications that we are developing in space, not the infrastructure that we're developing in space.
And do you think, yeah, Ludovic, but maybe just on the same line, do you think the role of Europe will catch up against the, I will call the pragmatic view of the United States? Because the difference here, when I go to the United States, you have huge government support and funding for this type of activities. Many companies we know, Palantir, even SpaceX has started by being funded by government contracts. We are not able to do that in Europe. So how can we compete? Is that something that we need to teach the government about the consequences of not? Because otherwise the industry will be monopolized in one territory. Any views on that?
Well, I wouldn't say that Europe isn't competing. I would say that Europe isn't competing at scale. And Europe is not competing at scale, in Jonathan's opinion, because there's a difference between risk aversion and risk tolerance, or risk acceptance and risk avoidance. And in Europe, there's a lot of risk avoidance. And in the United States, especially with investors, there's a lot of willingness to accept some amount of risk. And the consequence of that is more available capital. And so maybe one of the things to consider in Europe is a little bit higher tolerance for risk for those investments, and the consequences might be increases in returns on dividends. But again, I think SWISTA-12 is a great example, just to use that on this panel, of a combination of investment both from ESA and Switzerland and innovation that is leading to a direct competitive capability to things that that other industries, other competitors globally they're being competitive with. So I don't think it's a lack of competitiveness. I would say it's a lack of competitiveness at scale because of this risk avoidance versus risk